Artsakh is a very low bid, and that's, I hope that you'll have the same impression after this presentation. Big disclaimer, I'm not basing on pro-Armenian sources or pro-Armenian whatever it is, no. We're trying to be unbiased, just, and I also would like you to give something back to me and give your opinion as an expert. This is probably the best audience to speak about the legal aspects. When I got the invitation, I said, well, probably this is a good chance, because normally we have this notion that Artsakh is ours. But that's an emotional statement. We need to make sure that when we are asked questions, including in the legal field, we are ready to answer those. So please, let's get through the presentation together, and if you have anything, let's do some critical thinking. I would appreciate if you mention in which particular question you see that our vulnerability is more obvious, because we need to strengthen us. We need to strengthen. We can't do anything as a strong army, as a strong state, but we want it to be in line with this legislation. So if you don't mind, let's do a brief presentation, and maybe we can open up for the Q&A if you have. Here or sitting?
Yeah.
What do you prefer?
Whatever's comfortable.
We can do this. Historical and legal aspects of sovereignty.
Lights.
The territory is 4.5 thousand square miles. Population is 150,000 of the Republic of Artsakh as of 2 years ago. The religion is Armenian. Well, I mean, we are Armenians, right? We know where we belong. We know who we are, where we come from, and where we live. We feel part of the Armenian homeland, and that's with us. That's always has been with us. The largest city is Stepanakert. That's also the capital city on the bottom. And the neighbors are state neighbors. Formally, we're neighbors with Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Iran. So Artsakh has always been part of the Armenian state, whenever Armenia had a state, and even when we were losing statehood under this or that empires, we still remained Armenian, even there was a Khachen kingdom which preserved, at the time, which was the only Armenian state. So throughout the millennia, despite the Mongols, Turks, Persians, Russians, whoever was in the region, we always remained Armenian. Of course, we had minorities, and we still do have minorities, but the Armenian spirit of Artsakh has always been there. The modern stage of the Artsakh liberation movement, starting in 1918 when the Russian Empire disintegrated. It collapsed, and Armenia restored its independence in the region. Georgia restored its independence, and for the first time, we have Azerbaijan appearing on the political map for the first time. Azerbaijan, as soon as they formed, they put forward claims towards Zangezur, Artsakh, a couple of Armenian principalities and Georgian principalities. And for that, the League of Nations, which was the antecedent of the United Nations, they did not recognize Azerbaijan. They did not recognize neither the statehood nor the claims for Nagorno-Karabakh, for Artsakh. So this is very important that Artsakh has never been part of independent Azerbaijan. The independent Azerbaijan never had legally recognized, internationally recognized and authorized sovereignty over Nagorno-Karabakh. Actually, these are the two maps which show how Armenia saw its borders. This one, and Artsakh is somewhere here. And this is how Azerbaijan saw its borders. So there was a clear difference, and it was a bloody struggle, but the situation was more or less unstable until the Soviets came and the Sovietization of the region began in 1920. Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia lose their statehood again. So the only democratic country of Azerbaijan existed from 1918 to 1920, which again did not include Artsakh. When the Soviets come, the Soviet Union is not still finalized, the formation of the Soviet Union. They begin to demarcate the borders. And the state, the supreme legislative body of the Russian Federation at the time, decided demarcation of borders between two other Soviet republics, Soviet Azerbaijan and Soviet Armenia. So the situation can be compared to the state of Maryland deciding the demarcation between two other US states, not Washington, D.C. So there was no Soviet Union, there was no central authorities in Moscow. There was a forceful decision by Stalin, probably many of you Heard about him? Right, yeah. You heard about him, we felt him, and we're still feeling that thing. July 4th, 1921, all the delegates from Armenia and Azerbaijan, they negotiate that Armenia has authority over Nagorno-Karabakh, and we enter the Soviet Union with that. July 5, in violation of the protocol and all the norms, without participation of the Armenian side, there's a decision to place Azerbaijan as an autonomy to place Nagorno-Karabakh as an autonomy in Azerbaijan. So since 1923, we were given as autonomy to cool down situation and to live in the policy of brotherhood between nations, and by the argument that Soviet Union is a home for everyone, there is nobody Armenian or Azeri or Turkmen, we're all Soviets, and we should be just putting even the positive nationalistic questions away. But even throughout the Soviet Union, there were 4 times that the Nagorno-Karabakh legislature appealed before the Soviet republics to change the situation and to place us back into the Armenian homeland. But of course, you can imagine that the suppressive Soviet system didn't tolerate it. And we ended up living the entire period of 70 years within the Soviet Union as part of the Soviet Azerbaijan. So when they ask us, have you been part of Azerbaijan? No, we were part of the Soviet Union. We were part of the Soviet Azerbaijan as part of the Soviet Union. That was the only time when us and the Azerbaijanis had a common administration. The economic and demographic situation in the NKAO, Nagorno-Karabakh's Autonomous Oblast, it was bad. I mean, they were doing their best to change the demography, and they were inviting Armenians out of Karabakh and threatening to assimilate in Azerbaijan. They were delegating big chunks of population to Central Asia to work for any communism-related projects, like national projects. And as a result, 3% of non-Armenian population by the 1923 turned into 21% of non-Armenian population by 1989. So in absolute numbers, the Armenian portion remained the same. But the non-Armenian, which is mostly Azerbaijani, increased 7-fold. Gorbachev came about by the late 80s, 86 or 87, and he proclaimed the era of perestroika and glasnost, which meant that we could speak more openly and more loudly about the issues which bothered us, and we took another chance, right? And many people say that the Artsakh reunification movement with Armenia became the first truly democratic movement in the Soviet Union, which sparked similar protests and processes across the Soviet Union. So what we did is February 20, 1988, we legally, on the paper, appealed before the Soviet authorities in Azerbaijan, in Armenia, and in Moscow. In Armenia to accept us, in Azerbaijan to give us back to Armenia, and in Moscow to validate the deal, because that process required validation from the central authorities, which we never got. And as a response, we got Armenian massacres and pogroms hundreds of miles away from Nagorno-Karabakh proper, which kind of was the signal for us that this was not going to be a civilized fight for us, and we were supposed to be ready to take it to another level. It led to gradual escalation on both sides. Armenians began to flee from Armenia and from Azerbaijan. Azerbaijanis began to flee from Artsakh and Armenia. The Soviet Union mostly stayed away, and that was probably one of the reasons why Azeri attackers, they were even for the further escalation. After Sumgai, there were much more violent massacres in many cities, major cities across the then Soviet Azerbaijani Republic, but the Soviet Union interfered only when the level of nationalism in Azerbaijan began to threaten the very system. That was the only thing. Nobody really cared about Armenians, and we knew it. We felt it. Freedom movements, they sparked across the Soviet Union. Armenia and Azerbaijan seek independence in 1991. August 30, 1991, Azerbaijan declares intention to withdraw from the Soviet Union and restore the statehood of 1918-1920, which did not include Artsakh. In accordance with the USSR Constitution, September 2 of 1991, Nagorno-Karabakh declares intention to form the republic. That was done in full compliance with the enacting legislation. There was an article of the USSR Constitution adopted in 1990, I think, which provided that if a Soviet republic declares intention to withdraw from the Soviet Union, all the autonomous entities had the right to independently decide their political status, which we did. That is actually why the initial intention to for reunification with Armenia was replaced by self-determination movement, because the self-determination did not require Moscow's okay. That's we are being criticized for that, but we should be spreading all about this. So the process of the formation of the Republic of Artsakh was absolutely legitimate. We had our legal decision, we put it on the referendum, and 98.99% of the participants at the referendum voted for the formation of the republic. Azerbaijanis were also given the chance, but they boycotted it because they got the corresponding signal from Baku. But 21% of votes, they did not anyhow overshadow the ultimate result, because unlike the US system, we don't have the system of being registered, then go to vote as a registered voters. No, at the age of 16, everybody is registered voter. So 80% of the voters, of the people eligible to vote, they did vote. And we got the result which we got. Azerbaijan's response was very predictable and aggressive, and we entered the war. We entered the hot phase, all out. We were surrounded geographically. We were outnumbered, outgunned. Azerbaijan has always been oil rich, and they could buy quite a significant support from international terrorist organizations. Actually, not many people know that Armenians in Artsakh were among the first nations to fight with the international terrorism. Our estimate is that about 2,500 mujahids from Afghanistan and from Tajikistan were hired as mercenaries. And until Armenian government could negotiate with Afghani leaders to stop that flow, they were very, very big headache for us. But they failed militarily, and they left the battleground. We have very solid proofs, and we will try to reach out to the international community at the time to show that this is something else. This is not geographically restricted movement. This is a cross-border movement of force as a mercenary, but we were not heard, just like we're not up until now. So we had to take care of them ourselves. I mean, when I say we, of course, it's the next generation. I was young at the time. International reaction. International reaction was not as active as we would like it to be. It was mentioned by the ambassador that the US was one of the countries which extended support on the legislative level from the day one of the Artsakh liberation movement. There were two Senate resolutions adopted in 1989 in support of freedom aspirations of the people of Artsakh. But the system, the region itself, it was a little closed, it was a little distant, and we didn't hear the appreciation of the importance of the regional developments. Right? We didn't see the full level of involvement. Yes, we had the OAC looking into the conflict resolution. The OAC is dealing with the conflict since 1992. Why it is called the Minsk Group is because there was a format supposed to take place in Minsk, Belarus, which never happened. By the initial format, assumed the name, and that's when we call it that's why we started to call it a Minsk Group process. It is co-chaired by three countries: United States, Russia, and France. Since 1992, they've been traveling to the region, taking the messages from one capital to another. They also visit Artsakh every time. And the formal mission of the negotiation vehicle is to make the parties closer and help implement any solution the parties can arrive at. The ceasefire was signed in 1994. It was co-signed by the Artsakh Defense Army Commander. It was co-signed by Armenian Defense and Azerbaijani Defense Ministers. It is still in force. There is no time limit, there is no time limitation, and Azerbaijan, of course, has certain obligations under that document, which they violate, and Carlos said that too often we hear so many bad news from the line of contact. Line of contact is the border between Artsakh and Azerbaijan. But there was relative peace, which was regarded up until April 2016 as the biggest achievement of the mediating vehicle. Azerbaijan had the chance to develop in the way they wanted. We also had the same. They began to use petrodollars for arms, for buying political support, whatever they wanted. We took the chance to rebuild our lives. And that's where we saw the major Armenian participation through various channels, personal participation in post-war rehabilitation and business things. In April 2016, as you know, on April 2, Azeris again launched another attack. Now we analyze and we can say that the intention was probably they were realistical enough not to think that they could take everything, but they were trying to solve several problems with that. And to the big extent, the Artsakh problem has become a tool for solving domestic issues in Azerbaijan. That's why we don't underestimate them. We know that they're strong, we know that they're aggressive, and we know that they can play this card anytime something happens. April 2nd is the time when the Panama report showed up, which showed that in the background of declining oil prices and extraction rates and the bad life in Azerbaijan, because they are having troubles, right, as a society, as the economy. 800 million or something belonging to Azerbaijani leader, that was not the message they wanted everyone to pay attention to. And also it was tasting the water, how Armenians are united around Artsakh. Also it was the tasting the water in terms of which weapon is efficient and what direction they should be continuing if it comes to the army build-ups. Since 1994, what did we do? Again, we started to rebuild our lives. We unilaterally joined several conventions. We are trying to play as a constructive partner in the negotiation process. We were part of the negotiations up until 1998, when Azerbaijanis again tricked us, and they promised to solve this issue, but they said we cannot solve this with Karabakh directly, because we're going to have similar problems with other national minorities living in Azerbaijan. So let's just leave this between Yerevan and Baku. We agreed. The deal was validated by the international mediators, but of course we were lied to again for the regular time. And we are now, from then on, we are deprived of a direct participation. We're still in the process. As I said, the co-chairs visit the region, they meet with the Republic authorities. We can delegate people to deliver the messages where we want to go. And the fact that the representations are functioning across the world, which is also kind of sign that the world is interested in getting to know what's going on in Artsakh, and they keep an eye on this. Democratic and economic developments, they are also a very important component of being recognized as a legal and legitimate state. Many of you probably know that there is Montevideo Convention, which gives certain criteria any entity should be meeting to be called as a legitimate state. As I said, we know that we have to start from ourselves. We know that Artsakh's legitimacy starts and ends in Stepanakert. And I can say that as an Artsakhi, I'm proud of whatever we could do without large international help, without expertise, without legal clinics, without legal participation on what we're doing bad, where we could do even better. We had 5 rounds of elections on various levels, 6 rounds of the presidential elections, parliamentary elections, local self-administration. We always are inviting people from the Western countries. We are especially interested in having American and other people from other specialists from other democracies to observe the processes in the Republic. That's actually one of the very few cases in the region. When we open the doors, we extend our hand. We say, bother us. We say, participate in our life. Tell us what we're doing wrong. not because we want somehow to legitimize our, no, we just want to build our lives. That was the vision of our fathers who started all this, and that's the vision of the people who pick up and continue to live and make their plans with the Republic. In 2017, we had a referendum which enforced, we don't have now the Prime Minister, we have the State Minister. We have a stronger presidential and stronger parliamentary authority. So all those checks and balances are much stronger now. There are a few things which make the State Assembly, the Parliament of Artsakh, much stronger than it was before. And again, one of the developments which are still trying to get to the final point, because it is the transitional period within these 2 years. But everything is promising, and it was not overwhelming, it was actually overwhelming support by 77% of the voters. The constitutional changes. One of the things also, we changed the name from Nagorno-Karabakh Republic into the Republic of Artsakh, finally, and that's how we closed this page of non-Armenian rule over non-Armenian, well, Artsakh was part of Persian Empire, of the Safavids, and if you go to, dating back a few centuries ago, but it was first mentioned as Artsakh in the 7th century BC, and it was up until 14th century that nobody was listening to the name Nagorno-Karabakh, or 15th, 7th century. So we turned that Soviet/Persian/Russian domination in the Nagorno-Karabakh by changing the name and returning to the root and to the true name which we think that should be named for us. So please, whenever you hear Nagorno-Karabakh, correct them and say that it's Artsakh. Nagorno-Karabakh is gone. Nagorno-Karabakh is a problem with Azerbaijan, but the country is Artsakh. One of the biggest achievements we have so far is the Artsakh Defense Army. Physical security was and remains number one for us. We understand it. We would never dare to invite any of you, especially with your kids, to visit Artsakh if we were not sure that we can provide the security. We would never say you should be investing in Artsakh, you should be buying real estate, you should be making your plans with Artsakh, get your kids married or yourself married in Artsakh if we were not sure that the Artsakh soldiers can protect you. We're a state in which the defense army is under civilian control. It is controlled, the commander-in-chief is the president. We didn't have that post-war syndrome. There was a very smooth transition, with certain exceptions of course, but smooth transition towards civil society and civilian state. And that's the way we would like to go. Artsakh army, they say that there's an Armenian saying, small accent can take down big trees. That's precisely the case. We believe that the only reason Azerbaijan doesn't restart large-scale hostilities is because they know that the Artsakh army can be effective in counterattacking. And that's exactly what happened in April 2016, when on the day 2, they already asked Moscow to interfere and stop Armenian counteroffensive. It is an inalienable part of the regional system of security. We're proud of our army. We're proud that all the resources and whatever we were delegating, even sacrificing on the daily good stuff, on development. We could have had so many projects implemented on that, but no. In our case, no matter how thick is the folder of documents we sign with Aliyev or his successors, we're doomed to have strong army, and we understand it in Artsakh, and we do. And I know that tomorrow it will be even stronger than today, because that's the priority for us. International recognition, that's a tricky one. We are ready to be recognized. We develop in a way that at any moment, if any country is ready to recognize Artsakh, they can do it without any major political implications. They will not feel sorry, and they will not try to create some artificial conditions to give legitimacy to this process. We comply with all the requirements of the statute. International recognition is the number one question in our international arena, but if you look at the trend, international recognition in the early 20th century was giving certain guarantees of security, certain guarantees of economic relations and cultural. Those are practically the main spheres the international recognition is called to provide. Physical security, economic ability to engage into economic and relations and cultural life, right? So if we do have the opportunities and possibilities to solve those issues in full or partially without a seat at the UN, we're doing it. We're not waiting until Aliyev becomes more receptive towards our rights. He hates his own people. I mean, we're realistic. We know that it's never going to happen. We know that there are things which we can assume and implement and thus affect the process of the recognition of Artsakh, and we're doing it. I mean, we took it to one level down. If Washington DC is too tough to recognize Artsakh, we go to the states. You know, California is one of the 8 states which express support to legitimacy and sovereignty of the Republic of Artsakh. That's something we're very proud of. And if we just focus on our bilateral relations with California as an economy, it will mean a lot for us. I mean, it will mean a lot for local businesses in Artsakh. Right? So we have very good signs of international recognition. We still strive to be seated at the UN as a responsible and trusted partner to the international community. At the same time, we realize that being there doesn't guarantee your security. And unfortunately, we have so many cases proving that. So whatever we can do, we do now. And that's why we don't have another choice as an Armenians, right? As Armenians living in Artsakh, and of course, I would like you to think the same way. We can either wait and see where this process goes, or we can start acting now and affect the course of the process. Because when the time comes, they will look at our economy, they will look at our army, they will look at our civil society, they will look at our ombudsman's office, how effective it is in protecting human rights. They will look at all that thing. And now we're trying to do our best that the situation is right for them. That there is no any reason to say that Artsakh doesn't deserve international recognition. Because in so many cases, believe me, Artsakh's status is much stronger than that of so many countries which are recognized today. And that's our vision. We want to continue as a democratic society with problems to overcome those problems. The strong society is not the one which doesn't have. Every society has problems, but the strong society finds them and overcomes them, eradicates all the problems. And that's exactly how we see moving forward. Thank you very much. That's briefly about Artsakh. And please, if you have any questions, I'm ready to take them. Thank you.